Hey guys, welcome to Tuesday. A lot of really important news to get to very quickly. And so I'm just going to launch right in because I want to cover 3 things I think you should know as you start off your day and something to keep in mind as we're continuing to watch the coverage over the next several days. Just remember that the news is tackling some really big questions about what it means to be American. And so not all of this can be easily covered in a play-by-play, and that's often the way that the news operates today. So what I'm going to try to do is provide a little perspective on 3 items that I think are critical for providing some context for the time and place that we're in. So let's start off with what the president said last night in the Rose Garden address about mobilizing the military to deal with civil unrest. There is historic precedent for this. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but it's very, very rare, very uncommon to use when the president is at odds with a state. So I'm going to explain that. The National Guard is both a federal force, part of the Army Reserve if they get deployed to places like Afghanistan, and a state force. So they operate both ways. When they're not being used as part of a federal force, they can be mobilized by the state. The President of the United States can mobilize military units when he deems that an American's constitutional rights are being threatened. So past precedent you should know about where the president was at odds with the state really have to do with examples when desegregation was happening in the South. So where a president deemed that an American citizen's constitutional rights were being fundamentally threatened by civil unrest in the state. And actually, let me see if I can turn this around. There's some really great pictures in the Chicago Tribune today. This might kind of bring you back to the time about the moments where President Eisenhower, for example, or President Kennedy had to mobilize forces into the South to protect the constitutional rights of Americans. So it can't just be that the president doesn't think that the mayor is doing a good enough job in New York City. At least in the past, it hasn't been that way. So if the president, though, legally has grounds to think that your rights, your fundamental constitutional rights are being threatened in some way by civil unrest, you should know there is historic precedent to mobilize the military, but it's happened very, 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 very infrequently. So just keep that in mind. The second thing, the National Guard has already been mobilized for COVID. Tens of thousands of National Guard members have been mobilized for COVID. And there's a really interesting intersection between the news about the pandemic and what's happening in American streets right now legally. The same laws that are empowering local governments to limit your movement during a pandemic are the same laws that, very similar laws, that are being used to put a curfew in place because of protest or unrest. Notice that I am sometimes struggling with words. Words really matter. Then what we call people really matters. The same person that is a protester may or may not be the same person an hour later that is a looter. They may be the same people, they may not be. And they are viewed very differently under the law. So a peaceful protester exercising their First Amendment right on a street corner is one thing. Someone that's obstructing traffic is viewed differently under the law because the law is there for the safety of the community. So it's interesting to know that these are very rare times that we're living in where local officials are using laws to control our movements. One time for a pandemic, another time for our freedom of expression in certain scenarios. Not all scenarios, but in certain scenarios. So interesting to note that. By the way, what people are being arrested for, and the Associated Press came out and said now we're over 5,000 arrests over the last week in light of the civil unrest. Yes, there are arrests regarding curfews or obstructing traffic that are related to protests, but then there are very serious arrests that you should also be aware of. One high-profile case in New York, 2 lawyers have been arrested. One is a Princeton-educated lawyer being arrested for throwing Molotov cocktails. That's a federal crime that carries a sentence of upwards of 20 years. So you're seeing a wide variety of reasons for police taking people into custody, and it's not just because of violating curfew. It's for a wide range of offenses. So I think that's an important fact to know. I want to go back to what happened in Minneapolis exactly a week ago today. Remember, exactly a week ago today, the 4 officers involved in the arrest of George Floyd were fired. What's been very interesting to watch regarding the story of George Floyd, many times when you have themes in the news that involve police and violence and race, there's great disagreements about the details of the story. In this story, there aren't a lot of disagreements, at least from the president down to the state governor to the mayor and the police. We saw a first disagreement that's notable yesterday. For the very first time, the medical examiner came out with an official cause of death for George Floyd, and it was cardiac arrest due to police restraint. But the medical examiner also included other variables like pre-existing conditions and drugs in George Floyd's system. Now, Floyd's family disagrees with this picture that the medical examiner painted in their report, and they brought in their outside investigators who said, clearly George Floyd died as a direct result of police restraint with no other variables. This is notable because it's the first real disagreement we're seeing in this story between two sides, and this could have impact in the legal case going forward, but we'll see how it's used as both sides prepare to go to court. So I want you just aware of that, because it's very interesting to watch a story that has so little disagreement about the fact. Here's one, what it means as far as significance in the long run, we'll see. We don't know that yet. Just a final thought, I like to always end with something that's sort of interesting in the time and place that we're in. The Wall Street Journal was profiling an article about sleep. How many of you are sleeping well? I'm not. I'm sure you're not either. About half of us are reporting in one survey that we're not sleeping well and we haven't slept well for the last several weeks. Half of us are actually reporting better sleep than ever before. Interesting. One of the things that we're all reporting are more vivid dreams at night, according to one sleep expert that was interviewed in this study. So that may or may not affect our quality of sleep. I was thinking about that. I thought, in the last several weeks, we do, again, getting back to compassion for each other, we have dealt with quite an avalanche of news, not only a global pandemic we haven't seen, it's a 100-year event, and civil unrest that has become to historic levels. We're also trying to handle this news while sleep deprived. So we have to show ourselves a little bit of grace. Questions, comments, let me know about the news. How can we help during this time? We'd like to provide facts, solid, nonpartisan news when you need it most. So let us know how we can help. Direct message us or hello@smarternews.com. Have a great day, guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow.